Tonight, we discuss Strange New Worlds Episode 5, then we'll continue with Kenobi Part 3, and conclude tonight's 3-hour special with the return of the Orville. All this coming up right now on The Writer Brothers. Welcome to your Tuesday night home for Star Wars, Star Trek, and the Orville for the month of June, because that's basically what we're covering. We might do a special for the new Gina Carano movie this month, but we will discuss that later. I am, of course, joined by John's personal favorite, Corione, Witch in Residence, as well as John's personal favorite, Mr. CC Karaoke, John's personal favorite, Mr. Brandon Devil Cry 3, and of course John's ultra super personal favorite, himself, Pollo Zapatos. Gentlemen, it has been one hell of a week for Star Wars, Star Trek, and of course the triumphant return of the Orville. I am so excited to have this discussion. I've been looking forward to it all week. So much to unpack, which is why we decided to extend tonight's broadcast to 3 hours instead of just our regular 2. So, of course, our listeners on the podcast, don't worry, this isn't necessarily going to be a normal thing often, but when we have not just so much content going on, but just the, just so much happened across all these shows this week. Not so much, I mean, Star Trek was pretty lighthearted. Star Trek was definitely the easier one, which is why we're going to do it first. And of course, we will begin with what we did not like about Strange New Worlds 5. And so I'm going to ask, actually, instead of picking somebody, who wants to go first with Star Trek?
Well, given the sheer volume of volunteers, I guess I'll go first. All right, so we had what I'm renaming this episode Vulcan Freaky Friday, because that seems to be kind of what it was. Once again, my standard complaint about the room sizes. Like, why does Spock need a room that's bigger than my first apartment? It's just huge. And I mean, you could even see his fiance being like, I don't know about this place. So there we go there. Also, I feel like even with Spock being part human, I still don't see him decking a dude because he's calling him on it. I feel like that might be going a little far. I think they might be teasing the Nurse Chapel Spock relationship more than a little early going. I'd like to have seen that maybe like a next season kind of thing. Because, you know, as much as like I get like there is kind of a destiny of them flirting, man, I kind of want to see Spock and T'Pring make it somehow. Like that, I've actually kind of gotten invested in them having a decent, reasonable relationship. And I know it's going to fail. You know, I know a dude's shirt is going to get ripped and somebody's going to wind up in the sand. But I still kind of want it to happen. So, I don't know. That's where I'm kind of at right now. I thought it was interesting that, they've given T'Pring kind of the backstory of she's this kind of negotiator that goes out and talks criminals into coming back to, get rehabilitated through just her insurmountable logic, but still can't understand why Spock would, put duty before, the relationship. It seems kind of weird that way. Like, you'd think she'd be able to logic this out. But,
I mean,
those are my general complaints.
I feel like that was the whole, like, point of the episode. In a way, was, like, the idea was that, like, she kept thinking that if she was able to explain her job in such a way that, like, she was able to also get time off. Whereas every time he got any time off, he also was getting called back. And I think that, like, she just never understood that, like, he wasn't being called back like everybody else. Like, they weren't calling any red shirts or any ensigns back to the bridge immediately. Like, he's number 2, right? And I think she finally needed to, like, the chance to see that, which is, like, what the whole, I guess, like, the whole point of the episode. But at the same time, like, the resolution didn't seem real. Like her response still was, but you're gonna learn to make time for me, right? Not like, oh, I totally now understand why you don't make time for me, and it's not your fault, it's your job's fault, and I respect that. Instead, it was, figure it out.
Yeah.
But that's oh, go for it, Brittany.
No, you're good. You can.
Or no, all you.
I was gonna say, like, I'm kind of on the same page with Corione in, like, a weird both yes and no to what he said. Like, on one hand, I agree with him where it's like, it's kind of weird, especially when you consider the fact that after they've swapped and she's been taken away because they need Spock, and he's been left in her body in his room, right? Then people come for her job, and Spock's like, it's not a good time, some things are going on right now, and then they pull the card of, like, you're the only person that can do this, you have to come. And it's like, how the turntables, like, literally what would have happened if she was in her body at that moment? She would have gone. So then you have the convoluted argument of, like, well, you do this all the time. It's like, you just did it, so, like, what do you want? Like, on the other hand, you could take the angle that because that's her job, and her whole job is literally talking people into submission, of viewing her as right, that she then approaches this relationship in the same fashion of, like, no, this is what I do. I outsmart people all day, every day. The smartest criminal minds that we Vulcans have, I talk into submission. So I'm going to talk you into submission because I believe I'm right, so regardless, you're wrong, because I am a debater. That's all I do. So, like, you could kind of look at it as, like, this one lens of, like, it's kind of a straw man argument you've now made, or on the other hand, like, you could, which I think is probably what they were going for. Like, I'm definitely with Corion. I'm not it's kind of that, I'm not a big fan of the whole point of that, but I could at least see if their angle was that she's like this, I'm intelligent, domineering, and I talk people to, admit that they're wrong and get rehabilitated. I could see how they could make that argument of, like, she's approaching her relation the same way because that's what she knows. Like, that's where her headspace is. So I could see this angle of being sense, and I could see how that would cause the relationship to go into ruin, even if, like, they have the pseudo makeup situation of, like, oh, I kind of sort of understand your position now, but also Spock is, the show's very clearly going down the road of, like, Spock is being influenced by the humans around him. She is not. She is still hard up Vulcan, and I intelligence over people, and I mean that the way I said it. That I could easily see that just using that as a falling point later down the road, and, like, this being the point of, like, really showing that, like, this is going to be,
So this could be set up for their, like, ultimate wedge. Like, this is the thing that
they could
justifies
do that.
the breakup beyond because I don't know what you're referencing, Corion, when you say like somebody getting their shirt cut off in the sand. Like,
Yeah.
I assume that's from actual.
Yeah. So to
Go
spoil anyone who hasn't watched the original series, when Spock goes into Ponfar, which is their mating season, he comes back to consummate the marriage with T'Pring, and finds out that T'Pring is no longer interested in being married to him, and instead wants to marry this dude named Cybeck. And what winds up happening is, so what she does is she goes, I'm challenging you for a fight to the death over mating rights with me. And for my champion, I choose Captain Kirk. So no matter what happens, I either get rid of Spock, or he goes away for murder and I still get to be with Cybeck. I still win.
And that's interesting too. I feel like the nightmare he had then becomes an interesting double to that.
It's
Because
foreshadowing.
him fighting himself becoming human, if he fights is it Pike or Kirk he ends up fighting? Kirk, then that's effectively like Kirk is what is that human side then at that. That's an interesting, that makes that dream even more interesting, having that context.
A dirty double entendre to drop on episode 5.
Yeah, but the thing is
like,
only
I feel
people
like
who know old Star Trek could even see that as a double
But see,
entendre.
that's what I
clever.
mean, though, like that's what makes it kind of like dirty, is that like they're really reaching for the diehards so late in the game. It's like we finally
Yes and
understand
no.
that you guys care about the finer details, but now you're suddenly like, now you're gonna put this in, and like to me, I feel like you don't start giving ode until you've earned recognition as like a part of the group. So like once you become part of the Trek universe and everybody respects you as canon, then you can start giving your odes to your, like, who invented you, like who brought you up. Was it TNG? Was it TOS? Like the Orville, I think, is the perfect example of that. It's like it takes so much time to build its own universe, its own way, and then you start seeing lots of the parody, lots of the, we're going to talk about the things that they never talked about because it really frustrates me that they never got into this. But that's when you start doing your odes. You don't do your odes until you've earned your own title, your own status.
I mean, I actually liked the episode a lot, but on that point, one thing that I found with this show, with regards to the writing, is always that bit where it's, at least for me anyways, is like, don't overcomplicate the script when you're writing. And I haven't written a book. It's not, I don't have anything in the bookstores. I can't claim to be that level of professional, but it's like, okay, I didn't mind the spacewalk.
No,
there was a kind of comedy to it. It was kind of cool.
But
I'm always asking, and a little bit, I'll admit a little bit less with this episode, but and more especially with the previous 4. But like, was there a simpler way to go about that comedy that wasn't quite so, like, that didn't need quite as much explanation as a space force field?
Yeah. For me,
to me, I feel like that was just part of the coolness to it, because like it does make sense that shield could be refracted into some form of tunneling system, but at the same time, like honestly, it was just like a flex of their knowledge and their ability, and that felt part of like what the show should be doing. That felt original to the show. There was no way that Gene Roddenberry could not have afforded that CGI, that level of effects.
I liked the scene.
Yeah,
I'm just asking the question in general, like in the pilot episode where they had that the gene changing thing, and it's like the people's ears are like Spock's ear is changing in seconds. I mean, I was willing to appreciate it, but I was like, how does my brain was getting caught on does that make sense instead of just enjoying it? With the brain switching in this one, it was kind of the same thing. I like Freaky Friday, but then at the end of the episode, they had to kind of like throw in some like we found a medical solution to this, and I'm like, and my brain was stopping again to be like, okay.
So the
I was still enjoying it, which
yeah,
is a good sign, right? But
yeah, the brain switching aspect didn't bother me a lot because it's very much they definitely anyone who's complaining about it must have skipped Star Trek 3. Because this is not anything that this has been established in canon that you can move that the Vulcans can move their consciousness, and so it's like, sure, it seems like a bit much, and it was a silly episode.
It didn't.
A lot of TOS was a
didn't
silly
feel too
episode,
bad.
though. Most episodes of TOS, while you do have Balance of Terror and a couple of others that I can't remember off the top of my head, you do have those great moments in the original series. A lot of the original series was cheesy. And I understand you guys' complaints too about the lack of professionalism on the bridge. There's scenes of the original series where they ended with the entire crew laughing on the bridge while they're on watch, while they're just going. That's how they end the episode. Now, I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad. Is it necessarily good? Is it a sign of the period? I think that Star Trek has always had an amount of cheese to it across all the series. I mean, look at Deep Space Nine, Take Me Out to the Hollow Suite.
This is so much complaining about cheese as it is about forced cheese. Like, they're putting too much effort into the cheese. Like, there is that, like, they're getting into pseudoscience, but then they actually take an extra mile to explain how it's not pseudoscience in the pseudoscience.
Yeah, and that's
And
a
I think
symptom
that's-
of the new Trek that unfortunately is what it is. I don't like it a whole lot, and I
it
think
is
it could
pretty
be
funny,
smarter,
though.
but
See,
it is what it
the
is.
counter to that is the problem is it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because the problem comes back to if you don't then explain out the pseudoscience that we would probably take as just like, all right, cool, it's a sci-fi movie. There's going to be some, there's a certain level of logic you're willing to kind of look past. The problem is if you don't, then the people who aren't like your typical sci-fi like people who the other part of their audience that are watching it because it looks interesting and it looks showy that's gonna lose them if they don't explain it, because they're gonna be like, well, this just doesn't make sense. They don't even explain it. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
they don't really need to. So then they try to counter that by like, oh, here's not to say it's good necessarily, but the reality is they're gonna get backlash regardless.
Well, to me, I feel like they just went too far in another direction. So, like, the idea of the ritual, like, taking place, these are two engaged hearts that are fighting, right? So, like, the way they really should have done it was, like, they ended up calling their parents, and they're like, oh, maybe you guys are meant to be. And it, like, sparks this whole, like, no, that happens with Vulcans. Sometimes you have to go through this ritual, and it is that aggressive because of our lore. And that, boom, explains it away and explains why it got fixed, instead of adding in a whole extra science that fixes it. That, I think, is where it gets overdone. Is it's like you're fine going into this Freaky Friday. You're fine with it being the logic group with the magical telepathy powers switching bodies. None of that bothers us. Oh, now there's a science that explains it.
I am also going to say
especially
one thing,
though, because like the Vulcans didn't even have that science. Like, it was humans that grabbed they created the science for a thing that has happened to Vulcans before.
They did
Guys,
have it. That's why I mentioned Star Trek 3. But go ahead, Corion.
There is one thing I do want to say. Did anyone feel like the scene from Super Troopers after them saying hijinks so many times? Like that, if you guys say hijinks one more time, if somebody says it, I'm gonna Vulcan neck bench them.
But
Like,
I'll
that's
be
where I
honest-
was at.
I'll be honest with
so
you.
much of TNG, that's the cheese that I'm so used to now. Like, that happens every third episode. It seems like there's a word that gets overused too much, and Data keeps having to re-explain it to somebody, and you're like, oh my gosh, I know what that word means.
Yeah, also welcome to Reckless Raccoon, indicating that they're watching in the chat with an emoji, it seems. So yeah, was there, alright, so was there any other major gripes with this one? I felt overall this was one of the series' best. I mean, 4 was definitely more intense, but I think 5 really sets the tone for these more fun and character development episodes to look forward to.
Yeah, I for sure don't want to say that these gripes are in any way major. Like, as far as my complaints go, we're getting down to the picky 1 to 2 minutes of the 45, 50-minute episode. So, like, I feel like we should definitely get that known that, like,
Well, then
as far as
let's
complaints
move on
go,
to what
I'm
we
complaining
liked.
about the words. Yeah.
My only concerns with the show are the ones I've had from the start, which is sometimes I feel like maybe they're overcomplicating the script, and I feel like it's a really tough sell to use the existing characters and lore, especially if you're not really gonna stringently stick to it. But it was my favorite of the first 5.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there was a lot to like in this one. This episode was just fun, and it harkens back to some of the just fun episodes that you saw in TOS and TNG, where they just had a good time playing the characters and getting up to some of the goofy nonsense that you get up to, honestly, when you're doing this sort of stuff for a long, protracted period of time. Like, I 100% believe in, like, Enterprise Bingo. And, like, people would come up with crazy things like, a good time. Go sign this panel that's been with the ship since its initial construction, because it's fun and it's funny, and finding in creative ways to figure out how to get out to that panel to sign it is kind of cool, right? These are the kind of things that I'm 100% like, yeah, I could totally see some guy trying to solve the myth of, if you're chewing bubble gum and go through the transporter, does it regain its flavor? Right? Like, that's the kind of nonsense I could see a bunch of people getting up to on board a ship, especially when you've been, like, out for like a year and you've got nothing better to do than come up with crazy ways of doing things. This totally works for me, right? That scene where they're walking on the ship and manipulating the shields to do it, honestly, that is, like, one of the most clever things that I think I've seen Strange New Worlds do yet. I really like that. I thought that was great.
Shooting each other felt like something that me and my brothers have cared about since the very, like, first laser we ever saw. Like, what would it feel like to, at the lowest setting? Like, it wasn't exactly like, oh, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen, but it was like the most organic experience I've seen on Star Trek in a while. Yeah. Like, that felt like something I would do in that situation.
I felt the writing pulled the whole episode up. The acting was better. Everyone was having fun. It was quick. It was witty. I mean, whether or not one would feel like everything landed. Like, I wrote down one that I thought was just the greatest. When it was between Spock and Pring, and he's like, "Are you disappointed? I am realistic."
Yeah,
that, you know.
My genuine favorite part of the whole episode was with the whole scenario, which is like it's like that episode very much was like it was less subplot and more like we had 2 main plots going on, and the one with, and I never remember anyone's name, but the security chief lady and the other officer,
number one in Noonan Singh.
Yeah, number 1 in Union C, finding out about the bingo, and then after having had the comment of, "You're not fun," like that, I liked it also in the sense of, like, I agree completely, Corion. That is some nonsense that I could definitely see happening. Bunch of goofy, just dumb stuff, and also the reality of, if someone has a comment made like that and then left alone with someone else who will 100% just, like, push them and be like, "Yeah, no, we should totally do this. Yeah, let's do this thing. It's ridiculous. Let's go ahead and do it." They'll do it, and then they're gonna have a good time because they're just being ridiculous with no one else around. Like, that was the most fun. Like, that was my favorite part, was that whole little, like, story arc they have leading up to them shooting each other. Like, it was cool. It was fun.
That was definitely, it was really interesting though, because, like, at the end of, like, each activity in the bingo, they just kept asking each other, like, "Is this fun?" Which, like, really spoke to their character. Like,
yeah,
they're so into this, like they're so used to just living life the way they live it, that then when they actually, like, compare and contrast it to people with quote unquote fun metrics, they're like, I got shot. I mean,
this hurts.
Yeah, I know what it feels like now, but also, ow.
Yeah.
Like they're not.
I agree
they're
with
not
you.
having fun, and but at the same time, like they kept pushing through. They were just like, what if it's at the very end? And even then, at the very end, when they finally did it, they were like, the way that they did it the best out of everybody who's ever been on the Enterprise. They took their authority and made a shield specially designed for them to do something that everybody else had done the hard way. And they're like, no, okay, this is fun. Like this is,
Yeah. They had to
You know,
use their.
they're like, okay, wait, our perks actually are useful and fun. We've just never actually used them to their fullest, you know?
Yeah. No, yeah, that stuff was really cool to see that interaction, and like you said, like them just being like, is this fun? Like, is this what's supposed to be fun? Like, no, there's no flavor back in this gum. Like, I don't get it. Because there are people like that. You will meet people who like they don't have that same perception. Like, I don't get it.
I know in a previous episode we were talking about how the show kept having huge stakes, and I was thinking about that when I was watching this one because it was
Yeah.
genuinely low stakes. It was just like
Ex-
actual character development, having fun, and I appreciated that. And I would love to see a little bit more of it, of those like slice of literal slice of life stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I was thinking about that a few minutes ago while Corione was talking. When Corione was talking, I was thinking about how like I was like, yeah, and they did exactly what I was saying of like the stakes. You cannot constantly just make the stakes the highest stakes. You have to bring it down. And this was definitely a situation where the biggest stakes at play were the professionalism look of Spock and female Spock, because I can't remember her name, to bring like the biggest thing at stake was their reputations, which, to be fair, for a Vulcan, being taken seriously is a big deal. So like in a sense that like that's but that is a personalized stake, which on the reality of the whole is much lower than everything else. So like it's a way to keep a stake going, having some sort of stakes at play without it being just some like, because what's the worst that happens? Someone loses a job, or someone gets embarrassed and looks bad in front of the Vulcan. Like, yeah, that's bad, but realistically for us, we don't care. Like,
And like straight from the start of the episode, it's like, hey, the Enterprise got beat up on high stakes in the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're going into space dock to get repairs. It's a natural sequitur, and it's like, okay, you're not going to go from the ship getting completely wrecked, and then in the next episode, suddenly everything's repaired, and we're going to get completely wrecked again. No,
Yeah.
they went to have shore
Well,
leave
see-
while the ship was getting repaired, and hopefully in the next episode, they can kind of slowly ramp up. They're going to go back into space maybe and encounter something that's not going to wreck the ship or kill everybody, but it
No,
will,
that's actually really interesting.
challenge them.
I just thought about the other episodes so far, and the ship actually hadn't taken major damage minus the shield shots in the first 3 episodes.
Interesting, yeah.
And then this
Yeah,
episode
the
with the
shields had always
Gorn,
just gotten
they
lower,
got
real low.
wrecked. Yeah, exactly. And then with the Gorn, suddenly they got, messed with, and they actually had to go and take a break. And it's funny because that's exactly what I asked for between episode 4 and 5. I was like, I'm getting really tired of these high stakes every episode. Like, let's have some normal character development on normal standards, and then next it's this.
So then what we have to say, writers of Strange New Worlds, thank you very much for listening to our podcast. We appreciate that you're taking our input seriously, and
I can't
please
believe
feel
you're
free to
comment,
free to-
share your thoughts on our
Share,
thoughts.
subscribe.
Yeah, don't forget
Yeah,
to like
and
subscribe,
and
share
shout
it
out.
with all your
you want to
friends.
grab ideas from us, like just go ahead.
You're welcome to, use us in the episodes. Say that
Yeah.
an ancient data link from TWB is the reason why we know something about something. I don't know. Severance.
Yeah,
We
and,
did
and
that.
also,
If they are listening,
Also-
hey man, I'd really like an episode where people are in trouble on the ground as a small group and not just the entire ship. That would be cool.
yeah, and also I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to explain. So I really like the episode overall, but I'm actually going to share with you guys a little bit
Maria with
about my
Tiantelli. Welcome. Hello.
past history. Who?
Maria with Tiantelli.
Oh. Oh, look at that. For some reason, it's not displaying on my multi-stream. So, yeah, you're going to have to watch the chats for me today. Yes,
gotcha.
Maria, welcome. Welcome back. Good to see you here. Glad to have you. But I'm going to share with you guys. So, you might find this hard to believe, but I've actually written some fan fiction before in my life. And I had this crazy idea of actually making my own Star Trek TV series. Now, keep in mind, I was a young kid. I think I was still in high school at the time when I finally wrote this, and so I used to think that Star Trek could use a little more Wrath of Khan in the series, and so my idea was that it was going to take place on the USS Yorktown in the 23rd century. And, well, I'm glad it didn't work, because looking at all the backlash that some of New Trek has gotten, I realized that I was a New Trek writer before New Trek writers existed. But I had this concept where the Constitution class was going to be refitted into a full-on battleship. It was going to be capable of landing on surfaces, and that was going to be one of the things to get people into Star Trek. There's going to be more excitement and more battles, and, well, we have that now, and I realized, that's dumb. But anyway, one of the things that I had always wanted to see done was have not only having the Enterprise land, or a ship like the Enterprise land, but being able to walk out onto the hull of the ship, just like you can walk the decks of ships on modern day ships, on our sailing vessels, on our seafaring vessels. And so I actually had a scene where a couple of characters did exactly that. They walked out to the edge of the hull and sat on the edge of the saucer section. And so when I got to see that on screen on this show, I mean, at first it was a little taken back, like they're sitting out in open air space where there is no air, and then they had the force field up, and so I was like, I know that obviously wasn't a nod to my work because I never posted it anywhere publicly, and I barely ever talk about my Star Trek Yorktown project that I wanted to try and do, but it was a moment, it was something that I had always wanted to see in Star Trek that I got to see on screen, and so I absolutely loved it.
What was your inspiration for the name Yorktown?
I had found out that was actually one of the Constitution classes in the fleet, and of
Is that a
course,
justification, or were you just happy to see your name on one of those
there was
icons
definitely
that you buy
the
at the
seeing
souvenir
my
store?
last name on the ship, but then it was also the historical context of the fact that it's named after the Battle of Yorktown. Well, it's actually named after the aircraft carrier Yorktown, which is named after the Battle of Yorktown, which is where one of the two final battles where the United States won the Revolutionary War. And so I thought, well, this would be a cool ship to have a whole captain on. I actually named my main captain in Star Trek Online is actually that character that I came up with, and his main ship is the USS Yorktown. But like I said, it was going to be full of battles, and not, because the idea was like it was this patrol vessel that basically protected Starfleet's borders, engaged in different skirmishes, but it was all
that would be
quiet.
definitely interesting, because like if we assume that the Orville is part of the Star Trek universe as one of the more like exploratory known space vessels, then we really don't have a security military vehicle yet. Like, we've seen flagships, but we haven't seen any like actually like an actual battleship.
Right, and so that was okay. So to go into a little bit of my own fan work, so that was my idea, was that it was gonna be like, you know, the Enterprise is out there exploring space and putting on a good face for the Federation, and really kind of the way DS9 put it was that, you know, yes, we want to strive for paradise, but the reality is paradise, you know, isn't always supported by good ideals. There's certain things that you have to do. And I had this whole backstory that was going to turn out that the main captain was actually a member of Section 31, who was trying to get away from Section 31, and there was going to be a whole plot sequence to where his second in command figures it out, and they catch him, but as it turns out, he was trying to get caught because he didn't want to do Section 31 nonsense anymore. And so I had these really crazy ideas, but keep in mind, this was written like over 12 years, 15 years ago. And so the pilot episode starts with them actually like being late to the ship before it launches because they're drinking, and I realized in the military, that is how you get yourself kicked out. So that's not exactly something that you could just, you know, wave your hand at, like, no big deal. whatever. We were partying. It was before deployment, right? No.
Yeah, see,
It
I
depends
always
on your
wanted,
position.
Yeah, see, personally, I always wanted the first Federation warship to be named something like the USS Gandhi. I always thought that would just be perfect.
That would be right in line with Civilization 4.
Yep.
So, all right, I think we've got a
That
lot.
sums up Strange New Worlds, yeah.
Yeah, we do have a lot. I think that wraps it up. I mean, Strange New Worlds this week wasn't super complicated, which isn't a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But we do have a lot more to get to tonight, which is why we have the extra hour added on. And so with that, we are going to transition. And actually, I'm actually going to get rid of, well, we'll keep the formula going with the what we did not like. I was going to set it to general discussion, but we'll keep the formula going the way it is. All right, so Kenobi. Okay. Firstly, before we get into this, we are actually going to have to restart the broadcast. We are having technical issues.